Kierkegaard की किताब द सिकनेस एंड टू डेथ was published in 1849, just 6 years before his death in 1855. It is one of Kierkegaard's last philosophical works, और इस किताब में भी just like most of his works वो एक pseudonym यूज़ करता है by the name of Anti-Climacus. If you've read some of Kierkegaard before, you would be aware कि Kierkegaard की कुछ किताबों में वो एक pseudonym यूज़ करता है जोहानस क्लाइमैकस के नाम से, such as the philosophical fragments और द कंक्लूडिंग अनसाइंटिफिक पोस्टस्क्रिप्ट्स. इन दो किताबों के अंदर वो जोहानस क्लाइमैकस का pseudonym यूज़ करता है, who is a non-believer, who is not a Christian, and he has a very subjective approach to truth. So in this book, in the sickness unto death, Kierkegaard anti-climacus का word यूज़ करता है, pseudonym यूज़ करता है, who is a person who is very very different from Johannes Climacus. I would say even the complete opposite of Johannes Climacus, hence the name Anti-Climacus. इस किताब में Kierkegaard आर्ग्यू कर रहा है कि डिस्पेयर इज़ द सिकनेस एंड टू डेथ. इंसान एक सिंथेसिस है ऑफ स्पिरिचुअल एंड फिजिकल एलिमेंट्स, और डिस्पेयर इन दोनों एलिमेंट्स के बीच में एक काइंड ऑफ मिस रिलेशन है. और इस डिस्पेयर का सल्यूशन है वो कंडीशन जिसमें ये इंसान, ये इंडिविजुअल एक प्राइवेट रिलेशनशिप में एंटर होता है, इस्टेब्लिश करता है एक रिलेशनशिप विद द पावर दैट इस्टेब्लिश्ड and sustains it. In other words, a relationship with God. Now, not just this work, but I would say most of his work has been largely misinterpreted and miscommunicated even. The scholarship on Kierkegaard and great scholars, great thinkers, even thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre or Albert Camus, they've kind of bifurcated between the philosophical views and the religious views of Kierkegaard, and in a sense के religious views को completely subside कर दिया गया, जिसकी वजह से I would say कि the essence of his work was lost. क्योंकि it is important to be noted here कि Kierkegaard was first a Christian theologian, then a spiritual thinker or a spiritual mentor you can say, and then a philosopher and a poet. Preface के अंदर इस किताब में Kierkegaard पहले तो apologize करता है to his readers कि they might find his book strange to some extent, since it appears to lack the seriousness one would presumably expect from a book on religious or spiritual matters. लेकिन that is not exactly the case here, क्योंकि जो usually scholarly treatments होती हैं, scholarly works होते हैं, they're concerned about objective facts, objective information about history and the world of objects and facts. Christianity, on the other hand, in Kierkegaard's view, is concerned एक इंसान की spiritual well-being और spiritual progress के साथ. और इसी वजह से जो Christian writing है, Christian spiritual writing है, it should therefore speak directly to the individual, और इसके लिए एक less formal style आप कह सकते हो इख्तियार करना पड़ता है, which Kierkegaard obviously has done in the book. But that is not the only reason why the book would seem as strange as it seems. आपको एक irony, एक sarcasm नज़र आती है, which is very typical of Kierkegaard's writing style. Rather than making straightforward arguments in support of his position, वो opposing views को ridicule करता है, irony और sarcasm का बहुत इस्तेमाल करता है. अब इस किताब के अंदर when you're reading this, it seems कि Kierkegaard ने it seems कि this work is a parody of the system that Kierkegaard so passionately opposed. इस किताब का काफ़ी complex structure है of parts, sections, subsections, many definitions and categories. और ये I believe एक elaborate parody of Hegel and the other philosophers जो सोचते थे कि philosophy precise terms और concepts को use करके एक complete picture of the world, एक complete picture of the reality आपको दे सकता है. तो Kierkegaard की writing इस किताब में आपको दिखाती है कि वो यही फ्रेमवर्क, यही स्ट्रक्चर यूज़ करता है, यही रैशनल एनालिसिस और इंटरप्रिटेशन यूज़ करता है, और एंड पे आपको नज़र आता है कि इवन दो ही यूज द सेम सिस्टम विच दिस फिलोसफर्स से कि आपको कंप्लीट पिक्चर ऑफ द रियलिटी दे सकता है, एंड पे आपको इस किताब के नज़र आता है कि इट डजंट प्रोवाइड एनी क्लियर आंसर्स. सो दैट इज़ समथिंग वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग that I had to mention here. Now, Kierkegaard mention करता है कि in the Bible Christ raises Lazarus from the dead, and Christ through this teaches us that physical death is not the end of life. एक नॉन क्रिश्चियन के लिए sickness, death, earthly suffering, all these things may seem awful to the non-believer, to the non-Christian. लेकिन to Christians, ये सिर्फ temporary inconvenience है on the way to salvation and to eternal life. लेकिन Christians on the other hand, they must face a deeper fear than the fear of death. They may fear that their death is not sufficient to bring them eternal life. ये deeper fear जो है, इसको Kierkegaard कहता है, this is the true sickness unto death. इंट्रोडक्शन जो है इस किताब का, इट एक्सपैंड्स ऑन दिस सेम थीम्स एंड क्लेरिफाई करता है फर्दर व्हाट Kierkegaard मीन्स बाय डिस्पेयर. Kierkegaard की नज़र में ये जो रिलेशनशिप है बिटवीन क्रिश्चियनिटी एंड डिस्पेयर, इट इज़ अ गुड एग्जाम्पल ऑफ डायलेक्टिक्स. देयर इज़ अ डायलेक्टिकल बैलेंस Kierkegaard implies between हैप्पीनेस एंड अनहैप्पीनेस. जो नॉन बिलीवर है वो अर्थली प्लेजर्स इन्जॉय करता है और it is balanced by the earthly fear of sickness and death. And the Christian, on the other hand, enjoys higher spiritual pleasures, including anticipation of eternal life. लेकिन ये जो higher pleasures हैं, they are balanced or they bring about a higher fear, the fear that one will suffer an eternal death and not enjoy eternal pleasures. Kierkegaard कहता है कि एक इंसान, एक human being is a self which relates itself to itself and which has been established by another. दो types of despair हैं ऐसी self के लिए. Despair not to will to be oneself and despair to will to be oneself. Kierkegaard यहाँ पे ये imply कर रहा है कि human beings एक synthesis है between the infinite and the finite, between the temporal and the eternal, between you can say freedom and necessity. So we are both a physical body and a spiritual identity, and we are also the complex relationship between these two things. Kierkegaard के मुताबिक we are a relation of spirit and body that relates itself to itself, that relates itself, spirit or body, to itself, spirit and body. Kierkegaard कहता है कि despair एक imbalance या kind of a misrelation है in the spirit body relationship. इसमें डिस्पेयर ये भी हो सकता है कि एक काइंड ऑफ डिफाइंस है कि एक ह्यूमन बीइंग डजंट वांट टू बी व्हाट इट इज़ और वांट्स टू बी समथिंग इट इज़ नॉट, and in doing so it wants to neglect some of its aspects of its spirit body relationship. इसके लिए वो दो एग्जांपल्स देता है. पहली एग्जांपल है कि there's someone who wants to be something who they are not. For example, a person says that they want to be Caesar. They do not want to be like Caesar, they want to be Caesar. But they fail to accomplish this goal. Ab this person despairs over something. That is, the despair over not being Caesar. In fact, he is despairing over himself. He wishes that he was something that he is not. He wishes that he was Caesar while he is not Caesar. And he wishes that he were not himself, since he obviously is not Caesar. The second example जो Kierkegaard देता है वो कहता है कि there's a girl whose lover has died or has betrayed her, who's left her, and this girl appears to be despairing over the lover, लेकिन actuality में she is despairing over herself. She wishes to be someone that she's not. She wishes that she were still her lover's beloved. This is what Kierkegaard means जब वो कहता है कि despair एक internal problem है, एक एक्सटर्नल प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, और इस प्रॉब्लम के लिए these individuals are themselves responsible. Kierkegaard कहता है कि डिस्पेयर एक डिस्टिंक्शन भी है और एक कर्स भी है. एक डिस्टिंक्शन इसलिए क्योंकि it is only possible for spiritual beings. It is not possible for animals which do not have free spirits, nor for the non-Christians of the distant past जिनको पता नहीं था या फिर जो आइडेंटिफाई नहीं करते थे as free spirits that could attain eternal life. और ये कर्स इसलिए क्योंकि obviously it is a condition of awful unhappiness and frustration. Kierkegaard कहता है कि हर इंसान इस स्टेट में होगा बाय डिफ़ॉल्ट, इस डिस्पेयर की स्टेट में, unless they are true Christians, and he says true Christians are very rare. But this is not a depressing thought, he says. वो कहता है कि ये जो यूनिवर्सैलिटी है ऑफ डिस्पेयर, ये इंडिकेट करती है कि स्पिरिचुअलिटी एक यूनिवर्सल, एक डिफ़ॉल्ट क्वालिटी ऑफ ह्यूमन बींग्स की, विच यू हैव टू रिफाइन, विच यू हैव टू टेम, विच यू हैव टू conjure up out of yourself. Kierkegaard फिर डिफरेंट फॉर्म्स ऑफ डिस्पेयर को आइडेंटिफाई करता है. पहली कंडीशन वो बताता है वो ऐसी है कि जो इंडिविजुअल है वो सिर्फ इन्फिनिट पे फोकस करता है और फाइनाइट को कम्प्लीटली निगलेक्ट कर देता है. इस फॉर्म ऑफ डिस्पेयर ये फॉर्म ऑफ डिस्पेयर तब अकर होता है जब जो इंडिविजुअल है वो कम्प्लीटली सिर्फ फैंटेसीज़ में एब्जॉर्ब हो जाता है, नॉट इन रियलिटी. दूसरी कंडीशन ऑफ डिस्पेयर वो बताता है कि वो ऐसी है जिसमें इंडिविजुअल जो है ही फोकसेस कम्प्लीटली ऑन द फाइनाइट एंड निगलेक्ट्स द इन्फिनिट. He is completely absorbed in practical earthly matters such as business and social life while he neglects the infinite. He says कि इंसान जो है वो एक synthesis है of the infinite, that is the spirit, and the finite, that is the body. और ये जो human self है वो despair को overcome करता है by becoming itself, which means establishing the appropriate form of the synthesis of infinite and finite, and that is only possible through God. He says कि ये जो belief है that for God all things are possible, this is what enables people to avoid despair and hopelessness even when crushed by the most awful circumstances. एक तरफ fatalism है, दूसरी तरफ Philistinism है, which purport to have answers, but only faith can protect individuals from despair, Kierkegaard says. Kierkegaard एक हायरार्की ऑफ फॉर्म्स ऑफ डिस्पेयर बयान करता है और वो कहता है कि जितना ज़्यादा आप कॉन्शियस होते हो अपने डिस्पेयर के, उतना ज़्यादा आपका इंटेंस है डिस्पेयर. इग्नोरेंट डिस्पेयर वो डिस्पेयर है जिसमें यू डू नॉट नो दैट यू आर इन डिस्पेयर. दिस इज़ द मोस्ट कॉमन फॉर्म ऑफ डिस्पेयर और ये नेचुरल स्टेट है फॉर ऑल पेगन्स, Kierkegaard says, फॉर ऑल नॉन क्रिश्चियंस एंड अदर्स हु फेल टू कंसर्न देमसेल्व्स विद स्पिरिचुअल मैटर्स. फिर आता है डिस्पेयर इन वीकनेस, विच इज़ ऑल्सो नोन एज which Kierkegaard also calls not wanting to be oneself. इस काइंड ऑफ डिस्पेयर में जो इंडिविजुअल है he loses the desire to be who they are. इसकी भी वो आगे दो कैटेगरीज बनाता है. पहला जिसमें ये जो इंडिविजुअल है he is focused on earthly events and circumstances and fall into despair because of some aspect or some event or some occurrence in their earthly lives. These individuals do not want to be themselves क्योंकि they wish that their lives had turned out differently. दूसरी कैटेगरी जो वो बयान करता है वो है कि these are the individuals who are aware of spiritual possibilities लेकिन वो consistently spiritual matters को refuse करते हैं to pursue them. They do not want to pursue them. They are conscious of themselves and of despair, but they do not wish to be themselves because they feel unwilling या फिर unable to focus on spiritual matters, even if they know that is the truth, right? Lastly, Kierkegaard बताता है कि there is a kind of despair known as the despair of defiance, also known as the despair of wanting to be oneself. और इसमें जो इंडिविजुअल है वो चाहता है कि वो किसी तरह मास्टर बन जाए अपनी फेट का और अपनी लाइफ का, अपनी डेस्टिनी का, which of course is impossible, Kierkegaard says. और ये वाला form of despair is demonic because you can never achieve the object of your desire, which again is impossible. Kierkegaard कहता है कि sin का जो opposite है it is faith, not virtue. और वो Socrates की sin की definition explore करता है. According to Socrates, sin was basically ignorance because ignorance was the root of all evil. ये definition, Socrates की definition inferior है to the Christian understanding of sin. Socrates की definition काफ़ी ज़्यादा questions को unanswered छोड़ देती है. For instance, ये imply करती है कि it is impossible for someone to know what they should do and then willingly do something else. Socrates presumed कि अगर तो एक इंसान को पता है कि क्या चीज़ गलत है और क्या चीज़ सही है, तो then they would not do what was wrong. And if someone does that wrong, so they would not know what was right. Because ignorance, according to Socrates, was the root of all evil. लेकिन Christianity, Kierkegaard says, improved this definition and showed कि even when people know what is right, they can do what is wrong, and they can even willingly refuse to even try to know what is right and do what is right. So Kierkegaard की नज़र में sin एक negation नहीं है, it is a position. It is not the absence of virtue. It is not merely the absence of virtue. It is a state of being itself. It is a conditions It is a condition that human beings willfully take on. Kierkegaard कहता है कि it is a condition that people willfully take on, and it is a willful refusal to accept Christian truth.